Welcome to Anatomy of a Scene, a podcast where the people behind French film and TV walk us through their creative process. Episode 3, Director of Photography, Creating Images in a Studio. A podcast commissioned by Unifrance. In this episode, we interviewed Nicolas Bolduc about his work on the film Le Comte de Monte Cristo, in English The Count of Monte Cristo, directed by Alexandre de la Patelière and Mathieu Delaporte. If most of the film was shot on location, Nicolas Bolduc tells us more about the few scenes that were shot on set. Nicolas has been a DOP for 30 years, working in France, Canada, and the United States. He has worked on Les Trois Mousquetaires, The Three Musketeers, and 13 jours, 13 nuits, 13 days, 13 nights, directed by Martin Bourboulon. We also spoke with Hichame Alaouié, who also has been a director of photography for 30 years. Hichame has contributed to TV shows and feature movies. Recently, he has worked on Tapis by Tristan Seguela, Les Chevaux de Dieu, Horses of God by Nabil Ayouch, or Été 85, Summer of 85 by François Ozon. In this interview, he shares his experience of working with Éric Rochant on Le Bureau des Légendes, The Bureau, in which all the scenes inside the agency were shot in a studio.
So my name is Nicolas Bolduc. I am a cinematographer, and I shot and lit the film Le Comte de Monte Cristo that was directed by Mathieu Delaporte and Alexandre de la Patelière. So the role of a cinematographer is actually a bit storyteller, a bit technician, a bit psychologist for the director. It's somebody that actually listens, gives a lot, but actually creates the images and the mood of the film. In the sense that I operate the camera, I direct a whole lot of people to actually create the lighting, create the camera movements. And I obviously have a super tight connection with the director that I work with closely to be able to communicate visually his vision. So with colors, with texture, with all sorts of tools. And I think when I say that it's also a part psychologist, it's because I know that the director often sort of leans on the shoulder of the director of photography to be able to, communicate the good information with the crew and know exactly how to proceed to make the images work through his vision. So in the film Le Comte de Monte Cristo that was directed by Mathieu Delaporte and Alexandre de la Patelière, the main character that's called Edmond Dantes, who's this young guy that falls in love with this young woman and is about to get married. And as he's about to get married, he gets arrested by the police and falsely accused of treason. So he gets arrested and he gets put in a prison that's called Château d'If. And in that prison, where we actually decided to shoot, instead of shooting in a real prison, because we couldn't shoot in a real prison because it was a period prison and we couldn't do that. So we decided to shoot in a studio, on a soundstage in Paris. And the soundstage itself is actually this huge box where we can actually do pretty much anything that we want. So we constructed the interior of a cell. So what we did at the beginning is we decided, because the thing with this story is, since it's it hasn't been told in a very long time, so we could reinvent the way that we saw the inside of a cell. And we wanted a cell that was going to be almost impossible to actually escape from. So we wanted a cell with no windows, with no doors, and we wanted something that felt like a bottle almost. And the only exit or entry was from the top. And when we were thinking about that, since that kind of cell does not exist in real life, and it's very far from being something that's realistic to any kind of cell that exists, we thought that the best way to do it was to do it on a soundstage. So doing it on a soundstage meant that we had to construct the cell itself inside the stage and then relight it and create all these special spaces to actually shoot from outside the cell towards the inside. So it was interesting because the first couple of scenes where we actually discover that Dantes is stuck in that cell, we had to install very quickly how the cell was constructed in a way. So, we built this huge bottle-shaped cell that could open up like false doors on the side so that we can actually access, because obviously the real entry was only from the top. And we were able to create this sort of very claustrophobic space where we were actually shooting all in his perspective. So because we were shooting in his perspective, then we understood that there was no escape. And that was the claustrophobic, sort of effect that we wanted to create. So the difference between shooting on location, which is shooting in a real environment that exists in the case of a cell, if we were shooting in a real prison, we have certain challenges that we have to face. And when we shoot on stage, it's completely different. If we shoot on what we call locations in a real environment, we had to think about the sun. We think about the weather. Is it going to rain tomorrow? Is that going to be a problem with, the equipment they're going to be leaving outside? How are we going to light this environment? Do we have to put lights, outside the prison? Do we have to, is anything around the environment going to be a problem? Are there neighbors? Is there traffic around? Is there a road close? All these little things are actually details that we think about when we shoot in a real environment. But when we shoot on stage or in a studio, well, that's completely different. It changes the whole perspective. We know that we're going to be in a huge metal box that's going to be soundproof. That's why we call it a sound stage. So it's completely soundproof. So we know we'll never hear the planes, we'll never hear the traffic, we'll never hear anything. So it's like a very closed off box where we can actually create whatever we want. Obviously, it's more expensive because you're actually creating the set itself. So you have to design it, you have to build it, and you have to rent that space also for a long time. But on a film like this, where you have a little bit of money, it's probably the best thing because you can actually, imagine whatever you want and then create it, which is sometimes more interesting than actually finding the right space and then sort of trying to, film it in a way that's going to satisfy the story you're telling. The lighting setups and the lighting sequences inside the cell was very challenging. It was very challenging for two reasons. The first is we didn't have enough money to build two cells because it was one cell for Edmond Dantes, and when he meets l'Abbé Faria, he's in another cell. But we use the same set in the sense that we use the same set to make two cells. So the first cell, was Edmond's, and we wanted something very bare, very bland, and we wanted to feel that his cell was right at the end of the hallway, right against the rock of the island. So Stéphane Taillasson, the production designer, built this beautiful sort of, rocky wall that's right against one side of the cell. And it was very interesting because it was such a closed-off space that this is what I was trying to explain to the directors. I said, okay, I love this idea of this bottle cell, but the only place where I can actually light from is the top. And it makes sense in a way. I like using, sets and light them like if it was a real location that we were shooting in, with the same sort of constraints. In the sense that if this cell didn't feel it was lit from the top, it would have felt fake. And I know that a lot of people actually told me, where did you guys shoot this? It looks so real. And it looks real because, honestly, we shot it like if it was real. So if we opened the walls on the side to be able to access with the equipment and stuff like that, I still did not light from inside the cell or from the side no, the only light that was logical was the light that came from the top where he came in from. So all the scenes, I lit them from the top, period, from that little hole up there. So there was nothing else. And that was the biggest challenge, I think, because trying to orient just the right angle with the light, sometimes I could put a little bit of diffusion up there just to make one kind of ambience. And sometimes I would just remove the diffusion and we would, make a sun effect and maybe move the light a bit up there just to have the impression that the sun is moving. But it was always coming from the top. So it was a huge challenge because we were shooting in Dantes' cell. And then when he actually goes into l'Abbé Faria's cell, well, we were using the same space. We changed the wall with the rock. And then we closed off the whole space. So we had the impression it was in a different cell. But I did the same thing. We lit completely from the top. And the difference with Abbé Faria's cell is we put some candles. Because he's been there for 40 years. He negotiated with a lot of people up there. And he promised a lot of stuff. And in the end, he was the only one that could actually have some candles. So there was a sort of status between both of them that was a bit different with the lighting. And you could feel it right away. You knew exactly you were in l'Abbé's cell or in Dantes' cell. So there's all this segment between the both cells where actually Dantes leaves from his cell and crawls into the second cell and meets l'Abbé Faria. that obviously was built, as a fake tunnel in styrofoam. And so it's kind of funny because it really looked like a big square snake on the studio, but inside was all like, it's all a fake tunnel. It's not real earth. It's just styrofoam, actually. And it was interesting because that was another big challenge, because in the end, how do you light inside of a dark tunnel? That's the real question. I still don't know today how to light from, inside a dark tunnel. So the only thing I could actually think of was l'Abbé Faria to light the way, just put one or two candles to guide him through the tunnel. And then I would just put something very soft and bluey just to feel that we're in something dark. But it makes no sense that there's light there. But it doesn't matter. People that watch the film just don't think about that. They only think about, how he's going to get out of it, how he's actually going to manage, finding an escape. So all these things are actually in the spectator's mind. But, as a cinematographer, you play as a magician. You're a bit like a magician, actually. You sort of guide people's eye on the screen to something specific. And 95% of the time, you're guiding their eyes towards the eyes of the actor. And when they're in the actor's eyes, they forget about all the rest. And the rest is all the magic that we do that makes no sense, like lighting inside a tunnel. So we put a bit of light, but it was mostly a challenge, honestly.
My name is Hichame Alaouié. I'm a director of photography. I worked on the Bureau des Légendes for 4 seasons. The show was created by Eric Rochon, and I worked with different directors like Elie Cisterne, Pascal Ferrand, Elie Wajman, and Eric Rochon also. We are going to speak about a sequence in the second season of the Bureau des Légendes, in episode 5 and 6. It's a sequence which takes place in a cellule de crise. And at the same time, we are in Iraq and Syria. And it's sequences with tension because one of the main characters is hostage of the Armée Islamique. And so we are between the bureau of the DGSE in Paris and the desert in Iraq and Syria. So we have a montage alterné, like we say in French, between these two sets. So in Paris, in the studio, we were in the office, which is called cellule de crise, which is just a room with a big table, screens on the walls, and 2 walls of windows, one which goes inside and the other goes outside. In this sequence, we have something like 10 actors, and there is like 4 actors which are the main characters, and then the other actors are small parts. The difficulty with this sequence is that there is not a lot of action. They are all speaking together, speaking on the phone, or watching screens. So we had to make it living and without any movement of the actors. So in this kind of sequence, the challenge is to shoot this sequence with a maximum of action, without action. It's a little room, so the advantage to shoot in the studio is that we can move some walls to make some shots in different axes. So the difficulty on this kind of sequence is not the sequence itself, but it's to do it the fastest we can. So all this sequence was shot, I think, in 1 day. So it's much easier for us to work in studio because we can make a little bit what we want, and we don't have to compose with the timing of the sun. So it's much easier and much quicker for us. We were working all day with 2 cameras. In general, in TV series and in this one, we are always with 2 cameras. Sometimes 1 Steadicam and 1 camera on a tripod, but for this sequence, we were just on tripods. And we made a lot of little moves, so we have to help the stress of the situation to make it living. So it's a lot of little travelings, and it's more a question of organization than artistic, because when the light is done, the actors, they know what they have to do. So we have to be clever and to be quick and efficient. And also, in general, in series, you don't make a lot of different take of the same shots. If you do several takes, you always change something. You are filming one person, and then the second take, at the same time, you shoot another one. So, it's not very artistic. It's always artistic, but there it's also a matter of speed and efficiency. That's one of the big differences. The other big difference is that when I arrive on this TV series, I arrived to make, I think, the first season, the episode 4, 5, and 10. So you arrived, there is already an identity which is there. So you have to copy in a way. You have to make like. So it's another kind of exercise. When you make a long feature, you make all the shots, all the different sets. So you are the master of the image, light, camera. In a series, you have to enter in the identity of the show. So you have to do it for the show. It's very interesting. It's less artistic, but for me it was very interesting. It was the first time I was doing that. And it's a very good exercise. And at the beginning of the studio, it was not so easy for me. I remember the first day, we've made some sequence, and then at the end of the day, I was thinking, it's not exactly that. And the day after, the showrunner, Eric Rochon, saw the dailies, and then he came to speak to me, and he told me it's not exactly that. I told him, yes, I know. I already changed. It's going to be okay. But it was, you have to enter the show. You meet different people and different way to work and to see things. But in this case, it's the same for the director. You have to enter the show, so you have to deliver what's needed for the show, like the showrunner wants. So I remember for a big sequence, we had some list of shots that the showrunner wanted to have for the editing. If we have time, we can do whatever we want, but we want these shots. If you want to make something else and other shots, you can if you have the time to do it. So it's every director try to bring a little bit of his personality, like every director of photography, I think, but it's very little because you have to enter the show identity. For me, it was the first time really I shot on studios, several days and several sets. So everything was a bit new for me. Like the sequence on the elevators. You can cheat a lot, so it's very funny, it's very nice for us. You can take off some walls, you can change the light like you want. I remember some sequence where we cross walls. These kind of things, you cannot do it it's very difficult to do it in natural sets, but in studio you can play much more. I remember one sequence in the cube in the big open space of the Bureau des Légendes. There was a shot we begin outside of the cube, and at the end we are inside and making a chant contre chant. So yes, you can play much more, and also we've made like chant contre chant together at the same time. So for the actor it's very nice. For us it's more quick. But to make these kind of things, you have to be able to take off some walls, to move the set. So yes, for a TV series where you have to be quick and efficient, it's the best way to do it. And I think it's good also to have a mix because everything in studio, it's always a little bit fake. So it helps to have some outside sets also.
This episode was produced by Jeanne Boezek, editing and mixing by Fanny Martin and Jeanne Delplanque.
Original music composed by Fanny Martin.
This podcast is commissioned by Unifrance, and this episode is part of a series. Listen to all the episodes wherever you get your podcast.